Recording started.
Thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. This is Brian from Tactical Sovereignty. And what I'm doing this evening is kind of an addition to an episode that was done a few weeks ago. Is called Correcting the Presumption. And I don't feel that I adequately enough described my position in doing this. And so I'm going to get into that a little bit more in detail this evening. And then also at the same time, I will list the things that I took care of, the things that I did. However, each of those items, because there's 5, 6, 7 of them probably, I'm not going to be able to get into great detail on each one of those. I would say probably even each one of those items of things that we have to basically unhitch ourselves from, detangle ourselves from, would each probably constitute a full episode at least on their own. And when I mention these things, one of the things I think people should keep in mind is that when we first realize, how the system is being run, we start to wrap our minds around all the working parts, all the moving parts of it. A lot of people will be very apt to see something. I'll just give an example, say like filing a UCC1. People will be very likely to see something like that, and they'll think right away, oh, I see these people are doing it, those people are doing it, I'm going to do it. And they jump right on it. And to me, when I first ran across information, since, we're talking about UCC1, I'll refer to that. When I first saw things regarding the UCC1 and the filings that people were doing, and then the number 3, that's just basically an addendum to it. Something just inside me just didn't feel quite right. Wasn't sure what it was. So it wasn't something I jumped on. And none of these things were anything I immediately jumped on. I took the time to learn what they were all about, what they were established for, when they were established, who it was that established them, how they're being used today, and by what different people they're being used by, and what things they are or are not accomplishing. But those are some of the criteria that ran through my mind with each little step that I did. And people need to realize that doing some of these things, an argument that you hear quite often is that, oh, all this stuff was done in fraud. I shouldn't have to do anything. It was done without my consent. The list of reasons goes on and on. But the issue is that none of those things really matter at the end of the day when it comes down to whoever your opposition is, because you've already linked yourself in with these contracts. And at the heart of it, that's really the problem, is the plethora of contracts that people have linked themselves into. And then they want to turn around and sign petitions and things like that, begging the slave master maybe, for looser chains or, softer handcuffs, whatever the case may be. And a lot of that really doesn't make sense. I see, for instance, a lot of people, and it's always been a hot topic, talking about, for instance, the filing of 1099s and maybe getting different debts cleared or getting items essentially for free, whether it's a car or an RV or a home. And at the same time, I stop and think, oh, wait a second. We don't think that what the other side is doing is very honorable. How much honor is you receiving something for free that you haven't really put anything into? And I've had people tell me, oh, well, they're stealing our energy and our sweat equity and this and that. And I stop back and I think in my mind, okay, well, what has really been stolen from me as far as my energy? How are you measuring the energy you claim is being stolen, or your equity or your sweat equity. And how are you measuring these things? How can you pinpoint these? Because a lot of these are just talking points. They're talking points that you hear a lot of people refer to, and a lot of it sounds really good. I'll listen to things where people will go on and on for an hour or more saying a lot of things that sound really, really good. But when you stop and think about it and try to make something more concrete out of it, how do you take any of the statements that you hear and say, okay, how can I use this? How is this actionable information? A lot of things are claims, for instance, even claims that may be made in court, maybe in front of a judge, whatever the case may be. You know, their claims being brought forward. Well, fine. If you're going to make this claim that this is being done or that's being done, then you need to be able to establish that that's actually what happened. You need to be able to provide evidence that that's exactly what has occurred. I think one of my favorite things that I see really is referring to, for instance, the Sedicate Trust. You know, they made a Sedicate Trust when you were born, things like that. For me, it's like, wait a minute, the Sedicate issue that came up during or directly after the fire of London 400 years ago on a different continent, in a different country, by a different ruling party than is even established here in the U.S. Even though the USA, for anybody that wants to really research it, is directly linked underneath Great Britain and even higher so-called religious authorities, I guess you could say. But when I see people like pushing the things on like 1099s and issues like that, and especially related to tax, and it almost always has to do with money. The question I have is, okay, you're still a peasant. There's still a peasant that thinks that you can force the hand of the king. And there's some things that needed to be fixed, some things that need to be corrected to provide standing. Otherwise, you just don't have any standing to state this claim. And like one of the farm animals, you know, that's trying to order the rancher, you know, tear down this wall, you know, or tear down this fence. It makes no sense whatsoever. And so, you know, tonight's episode was titled Status Correction. And I titled it that reluctantly because that's not really what I prefer calling it. Because I firmly believe that everybody is holding the status and has the access to this status that they were born with. The problem is that they have voluntarily given it up and are carrying on another status created by man. Even if that isn't exactly the case, what's really being seen from the other side is merely a presumption. They presume that you're one of the normies or that you're the same as everybody else. And until that's changed, until that presumption has been changed on their part, then they have no reason to think any other way. I have a lot of people that have asked me, oh, who do I contact? Do I contact the county board of commissioners, or do I contact the sheriff? He's supposed to be, you know, the leading, you know, authority here in the county. You know? And my answer to that really is no, because these people don't really care what you have to say. You're still sitting there underneath that presumption that I mentioned. And this is the reason why people like Kelby Smith. Kelby Smith does a passport process. Well, at the heart of it, the purpose why he does the passport process is because of the flow of information. Where is the state? Where is everybody getting their information from that they're going to use? Well, they're getting it from their boss, from the Secretary of State. or at the federal level, the Department of State. They're the ones that have the authority and are able to put all of that info in. And then that trickles on down line all the way down to your meter maid. Okay. And so that would be a reason, for instance, why uh, Kelby does the passport process. I think there's another way of doing things more in a private level than the passport process, but I'm not going to begrudge whatever anybody's doing. If people are actually doing something, I'd rather see that than the people that sit back and don't do anything at all and just moan and groan about it, or cast stones at the people who are actually physically trying to do something. I remember one time I was sending a letter to the Secretary of State at the federal level, and the lady in the post office looked down, and I was getting a green card return receipt request, and the clerk at the post office looked down and she saw what it was addressed to, and she said, "Oh," she said, "this is cool." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, it's nice actually seeing somebody doing something rather than sitting at the bar bitching with a bunch of old men about the problems going on." And that's the way I look at it as well. Although in this situation, it was more on a personal level than she even realized. But, you've got to get out there and really be doing something. You can have all the Facebook Lives or YouTubes or whatever it is you want, Rumble, whatever, and bitch about the problem, bitch about this, bitch about that. But unless you're actually getting out there and doing something, I don't think you really have a position to be complaining. All right. I said I was going to get into like more personal reasons and things of that nature. And because I think that's what it is really all about. Even in law, gosh, whether it's man's law, with public law and then the statutes that are derived from it, or you can even go into the realms of spiritualism. Ask a witch, you know, how they feel about the things that people do. And everyone, all of these people will all come down and they will all use the same word. It's the word intent. What was your intent behind it? In law, it's called mens rea, your state of mind. Now, were you knowingly doing what you're doing illegally? What was your intent? That's what it always boils down to. And so for me, that's what this boiled down to. It was what my intent was. And as far as I'm concerned, there was nothing to prove to other men or women or to any legal societies or anything like that regarding intent. The only thing that really mattered as far as I was concerned when it came to my intent was how it was seen by, I'll just say, the creator. Some people would use the word God, but to me that's a little too generic. So there's too many of those guys floating around out there. So to me, it really came down to my intent and how it would be seen regarding the creator. And like I've mentioned before, you can look back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, when Israel said that they wanted an earthly king. That chapter right there just spells out so much of where everybody is today. And from that point forward, that's what man has had. We've had earthly kings. And then men want to come back and cry and complain because these earthly rulers have shown their humanity, which is a carnal nature, and they've screwed things up or dishonestly and on purpose done things that you think are wrong, and bitch about it. Well, I'm sorry. If you're going to want an earthly king, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get all the traits and false pretenses, inconsistencies, you name all those things that come along with being just the natural man or woman. There's no way around it. So that was my true intention behind it. Did I feel like I had done what was adequate? If I was to stand face to face with whoever this great entity is, and he says, what were you doing? Were you constantly just following the leader or following man? Or were you actually trying to sever that relationship and open up more of a relationship spiritually? And to me, the latter is definitely preferred. We see this over and over, and I know a lot of people will probably kick against the use of scripture, but it's one of the oldest writings that really exists. And there isn't much in there that doesn't ring true. And you go into scripture, and for instance, 1 Peter chapter 2, what does it talk about there? It talks about becoming a peculiar people. It says you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. And that's shown a couple other times as well in scripture. Deuteronomy speaks of being a peculiar people and a called apart people as well. And today people hear that word peculiar and they think that means odd or strange or weird, but that's really not the true definition of peculiar. If you go to Merriam-Webster's 1828, which is what I prefer to use, generally speaking, would be Merriam-Webster's 1828. For the word peculiar, it talks about a characteristic of only one person or one group of people. Number 2, under peculiar, it says different from the usual. Okay, that's sounding more like what we comprehend it to mean. Number 3 in Merriam-Webster's dictionary under peculiar is even more interesting. It says something exempt from ordinary jurisdiction, which makes total sense. If you are not necessarily ordinary, if you're not just one of the other sheep out there, then do the rules, laws, codes, regulations, statutes for all of those other sheep pertain to you? According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, under peculiar, no, it does not. I think this last couple of years has been very interesting when you look at this topic, because this is what the church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a peculiar people or a set apart people. And even you look at the opening statement, which was very appropriately placed in the First Amendment. It says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Well, it seems the past couple of years that the system has been stipulating a lot of things for these churches, which really only tells me one very basic, simple thing. Since Congress can make no law respecting an establishment of religion, then evidently maybe these churches are not the establishment of religion that people think they are. We need to realize as well, and I push this over and over with everything, is that whatever you're reading, whatever is written down, say for instance like the First Amendment, you've got to realize the mindset of the writer. You have to stop and think about who are they writing this to, and what is the view of the writer on this. And with the founders, if you go and read any of their writings, or letters back and forth to each other, you'll find that when they're talking about religion, they're not talking about Catholic or Methodist or Buddhist or you name it, none of that stuff. When they use the word religion, they're talking about a life of piety or a pure life, or someone at least who's striving to live a pure life. Which makes a lot of sense, because if you are living a pure life, or at least striving to live a pure life, then all those other amendments after the First Amendment isn't going to apply to you. Those are all going to be for the people that need the chains on or need the whip on their back, to lead them in the right direction. I want to go as well and look at several other things that are, I think, a little bit misunderstood by people when it comes to status. And it's still staying with Merriam-Webster's 1828. When it's talking about status, it's talking about a position or rank in relation to other people. That's the one definition. Number two under that is their relative rank in hierarchy regarding prestige. So then I think there you'd be looking at maybe, the difference between the serf and the king, for instance. And number three under that is the condition of a person or thing in the eyes of the law. It's interesting that in these definitions in Merriam-Webster, it's like always the number three one that's used that seems to start hitting closer to home. So that's exactly what's being strived for when you talk about maybe status correction or correcting the presumption, is that you need to change the viewpoint of these other authorities and what they perceive you as or what they presume you as, because they have nothing other to know about you other than just from your actions that you're just like the rest of everybody else. And this is most recognizable when people go from one country into another country. At the border, they're always asked, who are you? Where are you going to? What's your intent for being here? How long are you going to be here? However, in our current standing, nobody has ever done that with the state. They've not informed the state on any of those things. Who do you claim to be? What are you doing here? What you plan on doing while you're here? Nobody has ever divulged any of that. Like I said, at the border, they ask, hey, do you have anything to claim? All right. Well, I think in life, we have some things that we should be claiming as well. And unfortunately, the only time that we're ever required to produce a claim, it would be, say, for instance, when like maybe you're getting driver's license or you're filing tax forms, things of that nature, where they're going to require you to sign and agree under penalty of perjury, yes, I am a U.S. citizen. It's the only thing they ever ask from you. So to me, that's one of the biggest things that need to be attacked. And when you see that word citizen or U.S. citizen, you should think in the same time in your mind, you should think of the word resident, because everything is about residency. That's what everything is hinging on. There's an archaic term when it comes to, say, sovereignty. Well, first, let's look at what Merriam-Webster says about sovereignty. One, it says possessing supreme political power, right? Someone or something that possesses supreme political power. Number two is supreme authority within a limited space. Think about that for a second. Supreme authority within a limited space. Well, people would generally think the word sovereignty means what, like all powerful, and they're truly right now we're talking about man's law, but in spiritual law there is only one real true sovereign, which would be the Creator. I think people are pretty much aware of that, unless you're an atheist, I guess. But the system would love nothing more than for you to be an atheist. In fact, they're very happy to promote it because, if you don't want to believe in God, absolutely. If you don't want to believe in one supreme creator, absolutely. They have no problem with you feeling that way. Because guess what? They do know that position exists. They do know that that office is in existence. And the degree to which they do or not revere it, that's questionable. As I mentioned, an archaic term really that falls under sovereignty, which is the suzerain. It's if anybody wants to look that up, it's SUZERAIN, like the word rain, RAIN. And the position of a suzerain was a superior feudal lord. I'd say if anybody wants to do any research into feudalism, that would be worth your while to look at. It's still in existence today, but feudalism itself is probably somewhat archaic and not used as much. We just call it something different nowadays. The position of a sovereign also is, when you're not looking at it necessarily as a person, but as an entity, such as a state, it would be looked at as a state whose affairs are controlled by another. As far as their foreign affairs go, those are controlled by the suzerain. However, sovereign authority is allowed by the suzerain when it comes to internal affairs. So let me break down that thought just a little bit for you. Suzerainty is really the layers or levels of sovereignty. Within your home, whether, single family home and it's just a mom, the mom has sovereign authority within that home. She's going to decide, what color she wants the walls painted, or who's going to do the dishes, you name it. She's got the sovereign authority there. If mom and dad are there, then they both are holding sovereign authority within the walls of that home. When they step out onto the street, though, now they're entering more into maybe city territory or county territory, and somebody else has sovereign authority over those things, but limited sovereign authority, like the definition in suzerain stated, because above them is going to be the state, another level of sovereignty. And then above the state, and this can be argued in a couple different directions, but above the state would be the federal government, who holds the sovereign authority over the whole landmass. However, I think it's easy to see some of the things that occur within these levels of suzerainty when it comes to different states or even different cities in regards to the state or the federal government, because we've seen many times where they decide they're going to go against maybe even a Supreme Court ruling or a decision of the federal government or the state. And the state's answer to them really is not to go in there with arms and forcibly make them follow it. But what they do is say, fine, we're going to withhold funding from you. Which, in my humble opinion, I think there's a lot of areas, at least in the USA, that could easily be self-sustainable. You don't need that federal funding. That federal funding is part of those ties that bind you. As long as you're accepting that, you've got to follow the rules, As long as you're accepting the allowance from mom and dad every week, and guess what? You've got to follow mom and dad's rules in the house and take out the garbage, mow the lawn, et cetera, et cetera. So these things are displayed at many different levels. So I mentioned getting into some of the things that I had done without going into great detail, as far as maybe status correction or correcting the presumption will go. And like I said, each of these could be its own episode all in itself, because each of these, I spent a lot of time mulling over in my mind what made sense, what didn't. Spent a lot of time finding anything I could written on the topics, anything related to any of these topics, and started to see how these moving parts were all working, how each of these things played a role or played a part in our life, and whether it was something that was actionable information or not, whether it was something or not that you could actually do something about, and something that you could actually stand on, because that's requirements of doing anything. If you can't make evidence for any of those things when it comes to something that you want to do, then there's no point in doing it whatsoever. So the first thing I looked at would be what I call the title to the juridic entity or the legal entity. And at the same time was finding evidence that such an entity exists. And it really didn't take too long. And it's been nothing but solidified more and more as time has gone on from other things that I've seen as far as how the system operates. And that title or that registration of that juridic entity, some people call it a fictional entity, which really isn't appropriate. I would call it an artificial entity. It is going to be the certificate of live birth, the COLB in Canada. It's the SOLB, the statement of live birth. It's going to be different across the board. And one of the things a lot of people will ask is, well, I have people from like New Zealand ask me questions. I talk to a lot of people in Europe actually on a pretty regular basis. Uh, and somebody from Germany I was just talking to was asking about these same things, and you know, do these things apply regarding their countries? And I would say these things apply regarding more and more countries all the time. And the reason why is because of the advancement of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Those are the first things that are established whenever one of these countries are taken over. And so any country, and what it comes down to is the coin of the realm. Whose money is it? What money is the people using? What money are they using? Because that's who makes the rules. So any country underneath the IMF, yeah, these things are going to apply to. They just might be under different names or whatever. So, the first thing I did was really the authentication for the certificate of live birth, which one of the main purposes behind that is to turn it into an original document, because all you're going to get in the future when you order it or even order a certified copy, it's still just a copy. You're not going to get original, and you can't do anything with any entity or object, business, or whatever the case may be, with just a copy of its title or of its deed or registration or whatever the situation is. It has to be the original. Number two would be being ordained by a non-501c3. And that as well took a lot of time, a lot of research, and looking into the importance of it. Because really what it comes down to, the same as I had mentioned earlier regarding the First Amendment, you are an establishment. Your household is an establishment. Have you established yourself? Have you laid out who and what you really are and who you're serving? Because if you don't do that, then that's going to be another one of those things that's going to be presumed, and the state's going to presume that they are your God. Number three would be the voter's registration, for which I did a resignation on that for several reasons. Number one, the way you act shows who you are, and what you do shows who you are. And if you're participating in a system, then that's showing that you're consenting to the system and consenting to everything that system does. People should think long and hard about that. And at the same time, as being a registered voter or whatever, that's just another office or sub office that the citizen holds. So are you participating? Are you involved with that? Have you agreed to it? Those are some things that take some serious consideration. And at the same time, if you go back and you're studying different nations and countries, I don't care how far back you go, you're always going to find they're basically established on two different pillars. I've said this before: the pillar of the kings, the pillar of the priests. The pillar of the kings would be your legislative body. Your pillar of the priests would be your black robed wearing people in the temple at the head of your county, at the what they like to call the county courthouse, or call the public courthouse, which people mistake that term incorrectly. But they both those pillars rely on each other. And like I had mentioned, actual information, making sure that the things that you do actually affect something. Can you see any results from it? And I did this really as a part of a test because I was getting, those notifications for jury duty. And I thought, well, what happens if I knock out the pillar of the kings, the legislative body? Let's see how that affects the priest. And sure enough, it did. Number 4 would be when you realize that what they really do and what the certificate of live birth or the birth certificate is slightly two different things. But when you look at what's really being done with those, they even said it's establishing an organization. It has nothing to do with the child or with the baby. In fact, you can look on that document and try and find anywhere that it is in reference to a living being. Not going to find anything anywhere. It uses, instead of biological terms like boy or girl, it uses scientific terms like male or female. But even an electric cord has a male and female end on it. And so resigning as agent from that organization, because that's what they see you as. And everything in this system is about the role of agency and being a representative. Everybody is conducting themselves as a representative of something, especially when you look in business situations, which would even include your county courthouse. Everyone there is in a representative capacity. What in the world would make you think that you're the odd man out and that you are not acting in a representative capacity as well? Because you are. Number 5 would be establishing the unincorporated DBA, which means doing business as. A lot of people don't know what that means, which is really going to dictate and show who or what you're operating as, who or what you are in a representative capacity for. Either they've presumed that you are in a representative capacity for an organization they created. Well, you know what? How about creating your own organization? Create your own organization and be a representative of that instead. Um, Along these thinkings at the same time, some real life things you can do. Number 7 would be correcting how you do your banking and how your accounts are set up. The worst position anybody financially can be in when it comes to dealing with banking, if you get in and really study banking, the absolute worst position that you can be in is to be holding a personal account in what you think is your name. Back up and look at the DBA for a second. What does that do? You're establishing a claim as to who and what you're doing, what you're representing, what the name belongs to, who's holding that name. Or some states even refer to as who owns it. So that's what you're laying out right there with the banking situation, is that you're going to get rid of that personal account situation. Like I said, that's the worst financial position that you can be in as a fiduciary with a general bank account. You have the lowest interest rate. You are going to get The absolute worst deals on loans, absolute worst. You're going to get double or triple if you're doing it in a name that you've claimed through a DBA. It's just amazing how that works out. One of the things as well, a lot of people look at now, because it's something that affects everybody and everybody has to deal with, is the relationship as far as what you're doing with the driver's license. A lot of people will ask, "Oh, do you want a driver's license?" And to me, I think that that's kind of been thrown out there as, I don't know really whether to say, a red herring or just some shiny bait, basically, because whether or not someone is operating with one isn't really what it's about. That's not really where the problem comes in at. The problem comes in, once again, with your relationship to what is named on that card. Do you have any claim to that name or not? Do you realize that, just like the driver's license, whatever a signature is required, and I don't care if you call it a signature, you call it an autograph, it doesn't matter. The law doesn't even care what you call it. And they just want to see, what's been written down there by your hand. Anytime that's required, it's because there is a contract in place. Any time in life, look into anything where a signature is required, it's because there is a contract in place. There's something that you are agreeing to. That's part of the most important part when it comes to that, and how you're dealing with that situation and with that issue. There's a lot of statements that have been made through time by notable people that point to a lot of these issues and kind of lead you in a direction. I think about Pope Boniface. I believe it was Pope Boniface the Eighth, in the Unum Sanctum 1302, something like that, stated that the spiritual man can be judged by no man. Well, gee, where did he get that from? He got that from 1 Corinthians chapter 2. He was just repeating scripture. That's all he was doing. And even with some of the founders, Hamilton used to like using the phrase the unwashed masses. He's talking about the non-religious people, the unpure people, the people that were not living a life of piety. And I look at Shakespeare as well. I think I posted something that was in a fortune cookie today that stated that I have given you one face and you make for yourself another. Stop and think about it. That's exactly what it's all about. That's what using their person or their persona or mask will even be referenced in the definition. That's what it's all about. You're taking what was naturally given and granted to you and setting it aside, and you're using a creation of man. What was naturally put in place for you happened even before you were born. Jeremiah 1:5, it happened while you were in the womb. He says, I knew you. I knew you before I formed you in the womb. And God says, or the Creator says, and I appointed you. I appointed you as a prophet among the nations. This is part of that being peculiar, part of that set apart aspect all over again. That's your original jurisdiction. That was what was put there for you in the beginning. But though it's just so easy growing up in life just to do things the way everybody else does it, the whole go along to get along attitude. Well, I'm sorry, if all you know is how to live like the rest of the peasants, then you're going to be presumed to be just like the rest of the peasants. It's that plain and simple. I don't think anybody's had a hand up or anything. If anybody had a question, feel free to pipe in. I will unmute everybody. So if you don't want to be unmuted, go ahead and mute yourself back out. But I said at the beginning I'd give people an opportunity if they had something. So feel free if you have a question or anything. If you have background noise, please mute yourself back out. Just to kind of keep the sound quality kind of clear. But people have been unmuted. I don't think anybody's really got much to say. I've got, yeah, I see you there.
Brian, this is
533 Ken. How you doing, brother?
okay. Thanks for your comments before. Now, in addition to that, you were just listing off some of the things that you did that were a little more, I guess, to use your words in your opening statement, a little more on the private side than entertaining a DS for a passport. When you got to number 5, you talked about the DBA, and then you said that number 7 was the bank accounts. Did we miss number 6, or was it just misnumbered and the bank accounts were the 6th item?
No, actually, thank you for bringing that up. Is number 6 is, I remember I said, when you go in another country, they're always asking, do you have anything to claim? And people don't do that. And I guess I just didn't identify it as number 6, but number 6 would be your declaration of status. And, your declaration of who and what you are, what you're doing here, what your intent is. And that's the one thing that is missed by pretty much everyone, is that nobody's ever made that declaration. And this goes back to what I was saying in the very beginning, for instance, regarding like UCC 1. I don't know how many people who've done it, and I've asked them to define what the UCC 1 is, and 99% of the time nobody can. The easiest way to define what the UCC 1 is that it is a public statement through the Secretary of State. That's what it is. Myself, with my declaration of status, yeah, I went through the Secretary of State as well, but I did it privately. I don't think we should be doing these things publicly. In fact, they don't want us doing these things publicly. They would prefer that you kind of do this stuff on the DL or do it on the down low. You know what I mean? Don't alert the rest of the masses to it.
When you send that to the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, when you sent that, for example, to the Secretary of State, you were talking about going to the post office and so forth, if that was the same instance, you're really sending it to an administrator in a de facto entity. I mean, you're not sending it to a de jure government. Do you see anything wrong with that, or do you think that that's okay, or do you think it should be a little more formal and done in a way, you say you're communicating with them privately, but at the same token, they're still over on the other side. There's nobody occupying that. As far as I know, there's nobody occupying that de jure office.
Well, to me, it doesn't matter if there's anybody or not operating that de jure office, because either way, you've got 350 million other Americans to convince them of otherwise. So as it stands now, that's where the power is going to be at. And, whenever you contact somebody, even if it's like the CFO of a company, same as like I did with like Secretary of State's, let me digress just for a second on that declaration of status information, because that was a 1-page letter, but it had 5 exhibits with it because there was 5 statements made there. And so I gave evidence to defend each one of those statements. Okay. So it was basically kind of a packet. That went to 5 different entities. Okay. It went to Department of State, which is the federal Secretary of State. Then I went to Secretary of State for the state where I currently dwell, and also to my state of nativity. Now, the 2 other entities it went to. If you look at anything regarding the juridic person, and there's a reason why they call it the juridic person, and there's a reason why, for instance, if you want to get something changed or corrected or whatever on a birth certificate, vital statistics will tell you that these things don't get changed without a judicial order. A judge has to do it. So guess what? That's why they call it a juridic entity or juridic person. So it went to happened to be born on, I think it was the lower district for Michigan. It was either the lower or the middle district. So it went to the chief executive judge there, chief administrative judge there, and also went to the chief administrative judge for the district that I'm at for Florida. So those were the five main ones really that it went to. And like I was going to say, when you contact these people, it's just like if you contact a CFO of a company or a business or something like that, you don't mail it to a P.O. box. You don't mail it to the general office or whatever for that business. No, you might have to do a little digging, but you find the actual exact address for the desk of whoever is heading up that position. Whether it's Secretary of State or CFO, like a Chief Financial Officer, you make sure it's going directly to their office, to their desk. And sure, it's probably going to be maybe a secretary that signs for it or whatever. But it's just like, with the authentication, what comes back is signed by that office holder. Whether in the past it was John Kerry or, Hillary Clinton, whatever the case may be. So, it's coming from the correct office. And like I said, to me, one of the first things that you see, one of the first arguments that you see when you start researching is this argument between de jure and de facto. Give you a little bit of how to view a de facto versus a de jure. Let's take an office holder, for instance. If somebody is holding a seat in the U.S. Senate, then they are looked at as a de jure senator. If someone has ran for office for Senate and they won that seat, they won that election, but they have not yet taken the oath and be seated at that office yet, during that interim, during that time between the election and when they actually take the office, they're seen as the de facto senator. And these arguments regarding the governments or the states and the courts, whether they're de jure, de facto, to me really doesn't matter, because if somebody gets in some serious trouble and say, for instance, they get sentenced to death or to jail, I don't care if you call that jail cell de facto or de jure. It doesn't make any difference. You're still sitting in that cell. The electric chair is going to operate the same way, whether it's de jure or de facto. And part of this argument sprouts from the fact that commerce is prevalent, and commerce is what is running everything. And because of that these state governments and these country governments, they've all become companies. They're all incorporated. And that's the de jure de facto argument that a lot of people scream against. Now, is there anything you can do about it? No, there's absolutely not anything you can do about it. It is the way it is. Every government there is across the world, there's 193 of them recognized by the United Nations. Every one of these are all incorporated. And is that a problem? I don't see that as a problem at all. In fact, to me, I see that as part of your solution. Because if they're incorporated, well, then that means that, guess what? United States Inc. is going to be on Dun & Bradstreet. They're going to be listed there on D&B, not too far away from Walmart. Just another, incorporated entity. Well, what do you do if you don't like the policies or products of Walmart? You say, guess what? I'm not shopping with you anymore. I don't want to be a part of you anymore. I'm not going to be employed by you, for instance, if you don't want to work there, whatever the case may be. And you go to another business, whether it's a mom and pop shop or, another big box store or whatever the case may be. But To me, the fact that they are incorporated and they are de facto instead of de jure or whatever, to me, that's your solution. That should be celebrated, not be argued against. Because if you're just going to argue against that, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to go anywhere with that argument. You can argue all day long. There's nothing you can do about it unless you start using them as the incorporated business that they are. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, pretty much. I have one more thing. Would you, when you sent that to the State Department, for example, and to the other judicial districts or the administrative judges, did you get any answers back, or did you put a statement in there such as if there's no response in 30 days, that's considered consent, they failed to rebut it, or how did you handle that part of it?
Right. All of those were done as a notice. There was no requirement for anything back from them. Personally, I didn't care what they had to say. I didn't care what their viewpoint was regarding anything that I sent them, because what I sent them was the facts as they are, who and what I am and what my intent is, and there's no way anybody could argue against that. I did have something interesting, though, occur. When I sent these to the chief administrative judge for the district I'm at currently and for the district of my nativity, where I was born, where I was native to. That's what nativity means. A lot of people don't know that, it seems like. But anyway, when I sent that to them, what was interesting was that I got the packet back in the mail from their office that I had sent to them. That packet was returned to me before I even received the green card back from the post office showing who had signed for it. I mean, it was like hot potato. You know what I mean? It was like hot potato. It's like, ooh, they sent that back. Same day mail, sent it right back. Wanted nothing to do with it. But I did come to notice something. Between the time that they had received it and the time they had sent it out, something else had occurred with it. Because I'm looking at the packet, it's all laid out very nicely, like you would do, for instance, a Supreme Court case. Okay, it's one packet. It's all in its own clear sheet. You can just flip through it. If, for instance, you've got something that is provided like by the plaintiff or by a defendant, it's going to be signified by like a blue tag or a yellow tag. I mean, listen, I get in and research all this stuff before I do any of it. Well, so it was a nice professional packet that was sent to them. And when I received it back, I opened it up and looked at it, and I thought, oh, wow, this is funny. I haven't got the green card back yet, but I've already got this, you know. And I kind of did a double take and looked at it again and started like flipping through the pages of it and going, wait, there's something unusual here. And it took me a second. My subconscious caught it before I caught it consciously, but something was telling me something is just a little off. And what it was, see, in these sleeves, I don't know if anybody's used these clear sleeves or not, but they're open on sometimes on the inside where they would fit into a binder, or sometimes at the top. Well, these were open at the top where you slide in the piece of paper. And as I flipped through there, like I said, there was 5 supplemental exhibits provided to the one document, which was the Declaration of Status, which then had a cover sheet on it stating what was enclosed, where it came from, its purpose, etc. Basic cover sheet. The cover sheet wasn't touched. It wasn't really messed with at all. But when I was flipping through those pages and looking, I noticed that each one of those pages had a V-shaped indentation at the top of each page. If you go and take a piece of paper and go to slide it out of a sleeve, typically you're going to do it maybe with your 3 fingers, your forefinger, your middle finger, and your thumb. And when you grip it and pull it out, your thumb is going to put a V-shaped indentation in the top of it. All right, where am I going with this? So the question is, why would someone slide those pages out? Well, obviously, you cannot scan those into any kind of a record to keep for future, whatever the case may be, if they're still in that clear sleeve. They will not photocopy. You can't run it through a scanner, whatever the case may be. You have to remove those from the sleeves. It's the only reason why you would have to remove those from the sleeves. So they were not only removed from the sleeves, but they were also evidently carefully put back into that correct sleeve that they were originally placed in. And so to me, that was kind of an answer in and of itself, that what I sent them just wasn't some gibberish, because I didn't add a whole bunch of language talking about aesthetic trust or HJR 192, Public Law 97, none of that stuff. No, I just stayed with the specific things that dealt with me and the legal person that the state had created. That was it. Everything was very plain and simple, and got to the chase. So but I thought that in itself was kind of a reply back. And like I said, no other kind of reply came back from them, and I didn't expect a reply. I didn't want to reply. There was really nothing for them to reply to. What I would say, when I talk about like actionable information, what I would say is, what you do notice, is no, you're not going to have a knock on the door. Somebody comes and knocks on the door, and they got this ribbon to put around your neck. Oh, you made it. You're free. You made it to freedom. No, it's not going to happen. What you do see, the effect that you do see, is how you start getting treated when you deal with some of these officials in the future. If you should even have any type of a need or whatever to deal with anything, which I have had several, some of which really didn't relate directly to me. It was me kind of intervening on someone else's behalf. And what I observed in those situations, to me, was really nothing too much short of jaw-dropping. I was surprised, because I've never been talked to or treated in a courteous manner as I was in any other time by those people. Instead of me just being one of the serfs, one of the denizens or whatever running around on the land, now they were actually treating me like I was a somebody to them, almost like maybe the somebody even that signed their paycheck, it felt like. And I was pretty impressed with that, which I think they would get a lot further ahead if they treated everybody that way. But also at the same time, not everybody else treats them that way. So,
well, reports are pretty much coming back now that people that are using, I don't know who this other gentleman Kelby is that you're talking about, but the people that are using the passport process, so to speak, and getting the passport ID card, that when they swipe it, if they're in the back of the police car, what they see come up on the back screen is basically do not detain, do not interrogate, release immediately, lifetime concealed carry, etc. So is that where you would think, if you were to see that record, that your information has filtered down to from the State Department?
I would say that something similar to that would show up. And the reason why I say something similar is because I do not believe for 1 minute that that shows up for anybody. And like I said, when each of these things that I did, I spent a lot of time researching it and looking into every possible aspect I could find. And even like the do not detain situation or the 5 stars on the passport, spent a ton of time. I mean, some of these items on this list, I may have spent 3-4 months on. And I don't mean doing a couple quick searches a week. I mean spending all day, every day, because I do not watch TV. I got rid of that because you're not going to accomplish anything by having a TV on. I dedicated my time solely to learning these things because I had a lifetime of being taught incorrectly to make up for. And when it comes, for instance, to the do not detain list, with all the searches I did, everything that I found would correspond back and forth with each other and line up. And the things that lined up all came back saying there's only two times somebody's on a do not detain list. Okay. Because number one, it doesn't matter who you are. There's certain things that you do. You commit a nefarious crime, you're getting detained, period. There's no do not detain that's going to cover your butt on that one. Right? But there was only two types of people that fell under the do not detain category. One was someone who was a confidential informant. Because if you're a confidential informant, then say the state jurisdiction, you're a confidential informant for them. They don't want a lower level county jurisdiction person going and doing anything that is going to screw up their investigations. All right. And the second type of person is very similar to the confidential informant. The second type of person is someone who is having an investigation done on them that they're not aware of. Same situation. They want that individual to keep doing whatever it is that they're doing and keep digging their hole for themselves. They don't want somebody from either a lesser or maybe even a greater jurisdiction to do anything that is going to mess up that investigation. So those are the only two people I found that qualified for do not detain, and neither of those categories are anything I prefer to fall into myself. However, there is a statement on the passport that basically reads do not detain. You know, you're supposed to be freely allowed to pass through borders without being interrupted. And it says that on the passport itself. So it really wouldn't need any kind of special do not detain language, you know, that comes up on a computer. And as far as lifetime carry, I've never, that was one thing I could not find anything about whatsoever. Not because a lot of the discussions and a lot of the things that I'll read are just conversations or emails between attorneys or between attorneys and the court, you know. And some of these things will be mentioned, but as far as a lifetime carry, no, that never showed up. And I've never seen anybody actually come forward with any evidence that they're able to carry uninterrupted in whatever jurisdiction they want to go into. Never, ever seen anybody show any evidence of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your presentation and also for your responses. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Absolutely, Ken. And you're the only one with a hand up. So, all right. I appreciate you being here. Appreciate everybody else being here. And did want to mention that this evening when this uploads, I'm going to try and share links to other info I have, other sites I have, Telegram, WordPress, whatever. I'm going to try and share those in the description box down below the channel here. So if you'll click on that, they'll be able to find it, providing that the powers that be at YouTube allow me to put that in there. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But until then, you know, learn who you really are, where you're really from, and where you're really at. Because those are the things that you've been deceived on. And keep in mind, you know, when it comes to deception or fraud, there's a maxim of law that states, he that will be deceived, let him. Have a good night, everybody.